Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. I'm Sandra Martin, and I'm the head of newsroom development here at the Globe and Mail, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. And this is a very special day, International Women's Day, and our topic could not be more appropriate. We're going to be talking about representation of women in industry. So sectors such as manufacturing, mining, engineering, and transportation have traditionally been male-dominated. Yet studies show that organizations with good diversity are more competitive and innovative. Plus, businesses in just about every sector right now are struggling to find talent to sustain their growth. So we've brought together this excellent lineup of speakers to talk about some of the ways that we can increase the representation of women in industry. So here's how this is going to roll out. We'll start with a brief interview to gain sort of big picture, what's happening in regard to moves towards making better representation gender-wise in these industries. And then we'll have a panel discussion to do a deeper dive. And throughout, you're invited to ask your questions. I'll be keeping an eye on the questions and invite our guests to answer them sort of as we go through. The Globe is presenting today's event with support from FedEx Express Canada, and we're pleased to have a representative from FedEx joining our panel, along with other speakers who are here independently. So we'll have time for audience questions. I like to highlight, get your questions in early. You have a better chance of getting them answered. So please add them to the Q&A box as we go along, and use the help button if you're having any technical problems. So let's get started here with our first guest, Lorena Yee, Senior Partner with McKinsey & Company. Lorena co-founded Women in the Workplace, which is a research partnership with Lean In and the Wall Street Journal. She's co-authored a significant body of research, including The Future of Women at Work. So thanks for joining us, Lorena.
Thank you for having me. Happy Women's Day today.
Happy Women's Day to you as well. My big social media post was my two daughters who are teens and women in their own right. So happy Women's Day to all the mothers, daughters, everyone in our lives today. I think we should just reach out and say thanks for being there for us. I want to dive right in with questions. Again, thank you for taking time to join us. What, Lorena, is the current state of women in the workplace in Canada, across Canada?
Sure. What we see in a thumbnail sketch is that we see that while company commitment is up, the employee experience lags. And we can go through this one by one, but just kind of taking an overview look. One of the first things that we see is we asked men and women in businesses all over Canada, and we also benchmark that to what we see in the US. Do you think that your company prioritizes DE&I? Let's just start with, is it a priority? And, I think it's a sort of like a B+ grade, because 68% of employees felt that their companies prioritize this. A little bit lower in the US, we see it closer to 85 to 90%. But, here's the catch. Prioritizing is great, but it can also just be words. So the next question was, how many of you believe that your companies are following through on those verbal commitments? And this is where the rub is. Only 35% of Canadians who answered our survey said that they felt that their companies were following through. And I think before we get into all the data of, where women are in the pipeline and what's happening in the workplace experience, I think it's important just to start out with the fact that between intent and execution, we have a gap. And that's something that companies all over the world are facing today, which is how do they actually fill that gap?
Yeah, so which brings us to the next question. Really, how can companies do better? There are challenges that women face in the workplace, as well as, the gap that people are noticing as reported in the studies. What are some tactical things that companies, let's start with what are some of them doing, and how are they making a difference?
Well, let's also just baseline, what would better look like? And so when we think about D&I, one of the first things we think about is how are we doing on representation? And in Canada, we have a phenomenon where we actually don't start very poorly. We started about 49% at entry level. That's probably a little bit less than the education rates of women, but it's a pretty decent place to start. The catch is from 49%, we are steadily dropping at every level. And we look at companies across Canada, and this is mostly larger companies, Sandra, but we go from 49% to 37%, 35, 32, 25, and 30% at the C-suite. And so if you're visualizing the numbers that I just rattled off, imagine instead of a funnel, we see a pipe. We see a drop in terms of women at every step. And one of the most important drops that we see is that very beginning, something that we call the first rung, where you start with 49%, you are starting out great, and at the very first promotion, the first opportunity to get promoted for a woman, what we see is that for every 100 men in Canada that receive that next promotion, only 85 women receive that very same promotion. And so one of the important things is we often look at who's at the top, but we're not also looking at who's actually making it to that very first step. Because if you don't make the first step, you certainly are going to have a harder time catching up for the second, third, fourth, fifth, and eventually top role. And so I think that's a really important part in terms of where we are. And that experience looks even more grim if you're a woman of color. And so then, you say that's kind of the first part, the diversity. Then, if we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, what does inclusion look like? What does the day-to-day experience look like for women in Canada? And one of the things that's worth pointing out is that women across corporate organizations just face more microaggressions. And what's a microaggression? Kind of like a fancy word. That's more likely to be interrupted, more likely to have your judgment questioned, more likely to have comments that are inappropriate about your appearance, how you talk, your emotional state. These are these things where you certainly aren't going to file a lawsuit. You're certainly not going to call an ombudsman. But there are these microaggressions that happen. And interestingly enough, we find for Canadian women, report that 60% of them report facing one microaggression each day. So more than half of women in Canada who are in the corporate ladder are facing a microaggression at least once a day. And if I kind of multiply that by the week, and then I multiply that by the year, and then I multiply that by maybe 10 years of working, that adds up to a lot of sand holding you back. And that's not just your representation, that's how you experience work. And when we say it's an unequal playing field, these are the type of tangible things we mean. Harder to get promoted, facing more microaggressions. And the last point I would just sort of speak to is the impact of the pandemic. So we see that across all women and men, women are far more likely to be burnt out, far more likely to say that they're thinking about stepping back or actually just stepping out. Now, a lot of those women haven't acted on that. I don't think the economic conditions to do that exist, but the fact that they're thinking about it far more than they were before is really telling. And the final little piece is that for women who are saying, gosh, so many women are burnt out, I wonder what drives that. One of the things that we saw is that Canadian women more often than men are stepping up to carry the load in the workplace. And that's not just on the diversity agenda, that's on the basic agenda of how do you rethink work during the pandemic? How do you readjust to the virtual? How do you come back to work? All of those things, employees told us, both men and women, that women managers stepped in more to help them adjust to work during COVID and sort of help care for them in the workplace. All things that you want your leaders to do. And so those are some of the things in the state of state. So when we think about solutions, Sandra, very much fall in line with what is holding us back. So a really practical one I'll just start with, and then perhaps you also have some ideas here, is that one of the statistics I shared with you is this broken rung concept. That idea that for every 100 men, only 85 women see that first promotion. Very concrete thing that companies can do is to say, what are our promotion practices? How are we actually addressing that where it happens? And what we often find is that companies have great promotion practices, equality in slates, all sorts of initiatives at the top, but they just haven't translated that to the entry level, and they haven't actually empowered managers to look at data and understand how they can create a more equal footing for women at the beginning. So that's just one very practical idea of how you actually make traction on some of these problems.
And does let's talk a little bit about a topic we covered at our last webinar that I had the honor of leading as well. women sometimes need to take time away from work for, the soft skills that you mentioned they bring to the workforce, they also bring to their families. So perhaps they are caring for elderly parents, perhaps they're caring for children. Is that something that, you've looked at as well in regard to an addressable barrier that employers can look at?
Absolutely. It's a great one. So what we found during the course of COVID over the last 2 years is that on average, women in North America were likely to spend 3 more hours a day than their male counterparts, taking, kind of like work at home. And so, you add that up, and that, if you add that up to a week, it feels like a job and a half. It's because it's a job and a half. The other interesting thing is a perception piece, Sandra, which is that we asked men and women, do you feel that you equally carry the load? And men were far more likely to say that they thought they were carrying the load, but those very same women were like, no, I don't feel that I'm carrying the load equally. That's just a side bit there. But in terms of your question, in terms of what companies can do, this is a really interesting issue. So one of the things that we've seen companies do is just during the period of COVID, during reviews, take context into performance reviews. What is the context to which this person arrives? Are they actually have extraordinary responsibilities above and beyond what's happening at work? And if you think about the periods of time where there's no childcare, and that's not something that the state could fix. It's not something, it was a very kind of point in time challenge, things like that. We've never seen performance reviews have that type of contextual piece of it. So that's one tactic that we've seen companies do. The other tactic, or more systematic thing, is as people are returning to work, I think companies are rethinking benefits and also rethinking childcare. So how do they think about that type of support for families? And then, one thing I also have seen is a greater interest in looking at family leave. And I say family leave because oftentimes, what we see is that they're designing it for both parents. And so one of the great things that you can do is, if you're saying, look, we'd like to give more relief for women, also give that relief to men, because when they carry the load at home, they actually understand that load far more.
One of the things that I hear people say a lot, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, Lorena, is if there's something good that came out of the pandemic, if we can even say that, it's the fact that employers, many of them, have realized, wow, my staff can work from home and be incredibly successful and productive. Is that something that can help in this regard?
I'm very optimistic about that as well. And I think there are lots of silver linings. I mean, we can't really get through the last 2 years if we weren't actually noticing those silver linings. Everything from, in my own experience, being able to have dinner with my family every night. That's a gift. It's a gift that I will appreciate forever, especially, in the busy working world. But to your point on flexibility, what we found is actually 90% of men and women would all like some level of flexibility. The question is, how many days is that? And then the question is, how do you re-architect how we think about work so that there's no implied or unintended penalty for those who take more flexibility? So I think what the pandemic showed us, as you're saying, is that it's possible. That's great. Now the question is, how do you action on it? And I think that the companies that are best at this are being very proactive at looking at this and saying, we're not just going to snap back. We're not going to snap back to our old ways. And so if you think about it, if you said on average, we're going to give employees 2 days a week flex, okay, great. So then how does work change? What is the operating model, to use a kind of classic business term? What does that look like? And one very specific example, Sandra, is that you might think about how you train your managers differently. Because in a world where everyone was physically located, managers could just monitor inputs. But in a world where you're remote, one of the things we learned during COVID is that you'd actually measure more outputs, right? Because you don't see the inputs. And what we found by and large is that companies were as productive during COVID. So remote can work. And so just subtle things about switching how things are measured, how things are looked at, can be really huge in enabling and empowering women to have that flexibility.
So one thing I want to leave on with you, Lorena, is if there was, one overarching strategy or thing that you would like HR professionals or other executives to know if they're seeking to increase the representation of women in their organization? What is the one thing that they really need to know and begin to practice?
Well, my favorite is data, data, data. And the reason is because I think that data brings sunlight to what's happening, and sunlight's the greatest disinfectant. Meaning that what the data shows us is it tells us in black and white how are things doing. And that makes us actually prompt what action we should take. And so for companies that have really looked and invested in understanding not just representation, but the things we also touched on in terms of experience, they're just in a far better place to have interventions that actually address the challenges. I think for too many years, diversity practices were just kind of wishful spaghetti at the wall. Like if we try everything we heard, something's going to stick and things will get better. And hope is not a strategy. This needs to be incredibly pragmatic work because the easy stuff's already been done. So that would be my hope, is that HR teams and business leaders are really looking at their data.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and insight today, Lorena. I want to open it up now to our panel. So without further ado, first person I'm going to introduce is Lisa Lisson, President of FedEx Express Canada. Lisa leads a team of 7,600 people across the country. And next we have Noor Hashim Fawaz, founder and president of Build a Dream. Noor is focused on encouraging girls and young women to pursue careers in science, technology, and engineering. And we're going to hear a little bit about how as we continue on. Also joining us is Aaron Buchanan, General Manager with Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada. Aaron oversees all manufacturing operations in the North Plant at Toyota's facility in Cambridge, Ontario. And last but certainly not least, we have Ira Thomas, President and CEO of Lucara Diamond Corporation. Ira is a geologist and has been in the mining sector for more than 25 years. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Let's just jump in with the questions. And Lisa, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey in transportation and logistics, and what brought you to the field, and what kind of experience did you have as a female in this male-dominated industry?
Yes, well, first of all, it's so happy to be here with this incredible panel. And yes, I've been with FedEx actually, hard to believe, it was 30 years in January. So started off entry level my position. And, you know, what really attracted me to FedEx when I finished university was I think it's so important that we work for companies that really have a good culture. And it was talked earlier on about what is culture. You know, culture is about how you engage your employees, what programs you have to help them, whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion, mental health and awareness. So what attracted me to FedEx all these years ago was how the company was built on these fundamentals, which is your culture has to be treated with the same amount of scrutiny, investment, resources as you invest in your strategy. And so that really attracted me to FedEx 30 years ago. And it's interesting, though, if you think about the Canadian transportation and logistics industry, it is truly one of the largest industries in Canada, one of the largest. But sadly, less than a quarter of the people working there in this industry are women. And that's something I fight very hard every single day to try and encourage more women to get into the transportation and logistics industry, because we're deemed an essential service for, you know, moving goods all around, you know, not only the country, but around the world, keeping the country moving, certainly during this pandemic. And so really that's what attracted me. You know, when I talked to a lot of women, and we actually just did a survey last month where we interviewed working women, currently working, or women that are looking to get into the workforce with the age of 18 to 60. And we interviewed them last month, asking them about their thoughts on, you know, women in transportation, logistics, women in general. And we got some really, really interesting, you know, statistics. One of the things they talked about is that for those women right now, 63% actually that are looking to maybe make a career change because of this pandemic. You know, a lot of people are pausing and reflecting now on what really is important to them. But 63% talked about they're looking to make a career change. But 4 to 5 said now they want to go work for a company where they look at the leadership team and say, are there women in that leadership team, because they want to go and work for companies that are, diverse and have good equality. And I'm very proud to say at FedEx Canada, we are 50-50 men and women. And I think really that helps us to attract women into the working field. I'll just throw another statistic out. So last year, about 3,000 women entered the transportation logistics industry. And FedEx, we hired well over 1,400 of them just for FedEx alone. So we're trying to do our best to encourage, women to come to work in what traditionally they tend to think of as male-dominated industry, because we're changing the narrative on that, and we're making sure we have the structure, the programs, the flexibility that was talked about earlier on, flexible working arrangements for women and for men that need to do the drop-off, the pickup after school. And so those are all the things we're really trying to do to get more women to come into this very large industry that is extremely fast growing, more so now than ever.
All right, thanks, Lisa. And Ira, I will come to you next. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in the mining industry?
Sure, and I also want to say how privileged and happy I am to be serving on this esteemed panel today. And it is, for me, a real reflection on 25 years in an industry which has changed a lot, but maybe not enough. And, I started my career as a geologist, a graduate from the University of Toronto, working in the field. I grew up in a mining family, so the industry was familiar to me, and I sought to kind of go down a similar path as my father. And fortunately, I had parents that always encouraged me and never, ever suggested that a life in mining was something that a woman shouldn't or couldn't pursue. So I always felt very supported. And I think that as we get into the discussion today, I'm sure we're going to get to talk a lot about how young women choose their career path. So I feel very fortunate that I had a family that certainly supported me through my journey. But I grew up in the Canadian mining industry, was really fortunate to be part of the discovery of a new commodity in Canada, that was diamonds. And I spent 16 years in really a fairy tale, early career, going from a junior exploration geologist, working my way up to vice president of exploration, eventually being nominated to the board of directors, and then ultimately going on to start my own exploration company, which was the first of many companies that I would go on to found. And eventually that led me to my latest venture in Africa. So leaving Canada and venturing further afield, where today I have a workforce of 1,200 people, 99% of whom hail from the country of Botswana, which is something I'm very, very proud of. We have fewer than 1% expats in our workforce. And remarkably, we sit at 30% females, which is double the average for the mining industry, working in the mining industry. And something that I'm also really proud of is that we're 75% female at the C-suite. And we have the first ever managing director of a mine in Botswana running our local operations in Botswana. She was born and raised and educated in Botswana, and certainly really proud to have her leading the charge on our operations there. So maybe I'll just pause as that's just a bit of background on me, but I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you very much, Sandra.
Thanks, Ira. And very interesting, we're already starting to hear a theme of there being an example of success in these various industries, even though they're quite diverse. We're hearing that to get started, there needs to be an example of success. So we'll get into that a bit more as we go along. Erin, I'll move along to you. You work in the automotive manufacturing industry. How did you get involved in this sector? And what was it like being a woman in manufacturing when you first started?
Well, I can honestly say, as a little girl, I wasn't telling my family, oh, when I grow up, I hope to run a car plant. That was definitely not my young self. But I I did well in STEM classes and studied an engineering degree and was fortunate enough to be involved in a co-op education program. So the co-op program allowed me to dabble in different companies. And that's where I was first introduced to the auto industry. I found out very early on in my career that the auto industry is very fast-paced. There's a lot of innovative technology. There's cutting edge processing. But more than that, I really like working with people. So I was able to leverage both my engineering background and I think some of my people skills and really have maintained a really progressive career in the automotive industry. I've worked for Toyota for over 20 years. I'm almost 28 years probably in the automotive industry. I've had the opportunity to work in many different aspects of the business and travel to many countries around the world. And again, I think it's leveraging those skills that I bring to the table. So right now I'm overseeing, as you mentioned, the Cambridge manufacturing facility. I have about 2,500 team members and about 2,000 robots, all working in harmony to produce the perfect, beautiful vehicles that we're releasing to the market today.
Well, that's a great career, and I look forward to hearing more as we continue with our conversation. Noor, I'm going to move on to you. We've just heard from 3 women who have senior careers in unconventional industries. I'm doing that in air quotes with my voice. So transportation, manufacturing, mining. Yet you're finding that young women, when they're contemplating careers, that they often bypass industries such as these. So why is that?
Certainly. And again, it's an honor for me to be surrounded by these incredible women that have trailblazed in these industries. And one of the aspects is that you can't be what you can't see. So we need to share more of these stories. We need to share more of these pathways. And Sandra, one of the things that I want to highlight, I don't feel women bypass these career pathways. I don't think we encourage them enough or show them the choice and the option that they have for themselves within these sectors. And what I mean by that is we often direct career discovery by gender. So we encourage young men to go down these traditionally male-dominated industries, while we encourage young women to go into nursing, teaching, more of the nurturing, intrinsic work. And so we see that very, very early on. And then we expect these young women entering grade 9 to go into a trade or into a program that's unfamiliar to them, that they've never really tried. So encouraging them to be curious, to explore, to make mistakes in an intimidating free environment is very important. So being mindful that they don't have that self-confidence in grade 9 to be able to make that decision on their own. So having influencers within their lives guiding them that pathway is very important. And we know parents are a critical player in career discovery.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about how through Build a Dream you enlist parents to, sort of be champions for broadening those horizons for young women.
Yeah, certainly. So about 10 years ago, I was working at a women's organization, and my key role was to get women off social assistance and into the workforce. And when we did some research, we found that a lot of our clients were finding work in very low-paying, precarious opportunities, and the likelihood of them staying off the system was very low, simply because they needed those wraparound services on social assistance. It wasn't the fact that they didn't want these opportunities or they weren't ambitious or willing to put in the work. It was simply because of their environments. So naively at the time, I hosted a workshop and I invited 300 of my clients to come learn about career pathways in the skilled trades, encourage them to come so that they can make anywhere from $20 to $30 an hour. And at the time, only one of my clients showed up. And I knew that that was not because women didn't want high-paying positions. I knew that there was something there. So instead of making assumptions, I asked why. Why is it that women that are so determined to do better, to get into the workforce, to support their children, why aren't they accessing these amazing and incredible opportunities? And I found out that women are underrepresented in the skilled trades and in STEM. And so we wanted to dig a little bit more and ask young women what influences their career decisions, because in order to figure out the how, we needed to know the why. And what we heard from young women is that their parents are a key player. They're the number one player when it comes to the decisions that they're making in their career decisions, that there are still jobs that they feel that they can't do simply because they're a woman, that they're discouraged, and also that language matters. And that is even using certain acronyms like STEM. They didn't know what STEM stood for, or what the skilled trades really entailed, or the apprenticeship pathway. So we realized that the access to information they didn't have at that age. So how could they know what they don't know? And so we launched what was intended to be a one-off event where we would invite parents and their daughters, and they would come here from incredible role models in the industry. And then they would get a chance to network with companies and school boards, and essentially bringing all the puzzle pieces together so that parents and their daughters can make a career-informed decision. And then in our marketing, we didn't talk about the skilled trades or science, technology, engineering, and math. We simply told families, come learn about career pathways for your daughter that are in demand and help her build her dream. And we know that as parents, we want the best for our children, and we want them to be able to pick a career pathway where they're going to prosper. So that first event, we reached about 150 families, and the feedback was overwhelming. What parents said was, I just had no idea that this was a pathway for my daughter, and they wanted to learn more.
Yeah, interesting. We'll come back to see how that's grown over time. I want to get another perspective, and Lisa, I'll come back to you. So, you've talked about how FedEx Express is sort of bucking the perception that transportation and logistics isn't a place where women can thrive, but they are thriving at your organization. What do you think about the representation of women across the industry more broadly? What have you seen in terms of changes, trends, and what can be done to keep that growing?
Yeah, so I would say that the companies that do well in these male-dominated industries, whether it just be other companies in the transportation sector, or just as the industries we have here today, which are not traditionally female driven, the companies that really do thrive are those companies that have a very good culture, that have diversity and inclusion programs, that have mentoring and sponsorship programs, and also make sure that, it was talked earlier on that, what's stopping women from advancing their career? And we heard about, the 100 men get promoted versus the 83. Well, what's important is the companies that are successful, having diversity, inclusion, having more women, are those companies that put a focus on recruitment, on hiring, on their bench strength. So making sure when they're going out and looking to hire people, or they're looking to promote people, to make sure that they start with, do I have a diverse pool to select from, not just from women, but just diversity in general, because we all know that the boards that are more diverse, companies that are more diverse, they have better financial results, have more engaged employees, more happy employees. So, Sandra, really it's that, and Lorena said it earlier on, that HR component, which is tied to culture, is so important. Having these programs in place. FedEx had these programs when I started 30 years ago, and that's what attracted me to this company, and I think what has helped us make very successful in attracting and recruiting women. So those companies that embrace these things as part of their core DNA will be very successful and attracting women, especially in non-kind of women-dominated sectors. And I cannot estimate enough the point of those programs being critical to support women now more than ever, and also having very flexible arrangements, because this pandemic has knocked a lot of people around, in the sense more so for women who've had to take a backseat in their career, look after the children, look after the elderly parents. We need more flexibility in the work environment, especially for women, now more than ever.
So how important is it to track or benchmark those kinds of programs so that you're actually achieving what you're setting out to achieve? And how is that done?
So, great question. So, a couple things. I think it's so important for companies to have internal survey, feedback, and action programs. So, at FedEx, for example, we survey all of our employees. It's anonymous. We get the feedback, and we ask them questions about: do you feel valued? Do our programs support you? We get into the weeds on what's the pulse of our organization, how engaged are our employees, and we take all of those surveys and then we gather the feedback and put that into action programs. So companies need to have very solid internal programs where employees can rank you as to how you're doing overall as a leadership team and how valued they feel and how inclusive they feel. But also at the same time, I'm a firm believer that we always have to be in a state of continuous improvement. So I and my executive team, I am constantly networking, asking other CEOs, other peers, what are you doing to attract women? What are you doing? We have to benchmark with other companies externally to see if, to look at best practices. So that data, that knowledge, that research, it's powerful. And we have to always keep trying to be better human beings, better leaders, but making sure that our companies are truly embracing the things that matter, especially when it comes to supporting women in the working environment.
Okay, thanks. Now, Ira, I would like to get your take on this. Your company stands out, as we discussed, for having a very high representation of women, both in the employee base and in executive roles. So how did you achieve that?
First of all, we're a much smaller organization than the other companies being represented here today. So I think it's I don't want to say it's easier, it's just different in the approach that we're taking, and something that Lorena said earlier in her comments about the importance of working throughout an organization is something that really resonated with me. I also sit on the board of Suncor, one of Canada's largest energy companies, which is a very large organization. And the type of surveys that Lisa's talking about that you conduct, which are so critical, have to be asking the right questions, and they have to be targeting the right audience within your organizational structure, and you're going to get different answers, and how you take that information and data and actually digest it and interpret it effectively is actually really critical, because I think we can get to the point where we become very survey focused, but at the end of the day, it is really about making sure that when you're developing your cultural priorities, it starts at the top and it's working its way through the whole organization, and that you're getting the right feedback to be able to make really good decisions. And for Lucara, honestly, for me, it was about I'm a single mother. I have 2 young daughters. I work hard, and we're a very people-driven organization. And the women that I'm working with in my own organization, one of them I've worked with for 25 years, and we very much have shared values, and we've always taken a team approach. And I think we attract top female talent because they want to work in that environment, in an environment where they feel that they are listened to, where they feel that they are really part of a team. And further to the point that Lisa made, flexibility and understanding about many of the other obligations that we have as women, whether it be for our families or communities, is something that you have to prioritize as an employer. You have to be willing to say, you know what, you are worth it, and we are very open to working with you to structure not only the right environment for, in which you want to work, but actually, where do you want to be in 5 years? What does your career development look like? And I think often we are really good at focusing on that original hire, but retention is such a core piece. I mean, it's so important for women. They want to be in a great job that pays well, but they really want to know that there's future opportunity, and that they can grow with this organization, that it's going to be meaningful longer term. And I think that's something we try and really work on in Little Lucara. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're in an entry-level position, where, by the way, we had a cleaning lady that we eventually promoted to become involved in our environment department now, and is leading the charge on a bunch of the stewardship activities that we're doing around our mine. Equally important at that level than working with our C-suite, who you've had to competitively outbid 4 other companies to get, and now are working to retain and get them to the next level in their career. So I think you really have to have a holistic approach. You've got to be looking throughout the organization, and it's tone from the top. You know, what do you want to represent as the leadership in your organization? It's very clear that there's a big prize in successfully building a diverse, culture that's inclusive, and the prize is a company that's actually more successful in every possible way. So we all know we want that. The question is, how do you get that? And I think all of the things we're talking about today, and Noor, I just commend everything that you do, because it's so important to get to those young girls. I have 2 daughters myself, and inspiring them to think beyond, to think about, any possibility is something that's really hard to do in the world of today, where they're so influenced by this broad global world we live in, particularly with social media. And so I think it really starts with those young women. And Erin, you mentioned technology as well. I think a lot of people think of our industries, whether it's FedEx or Toyota or Lucar in our mining, as old economy industries. Where is the future economy going to be? And we're not that. We're very much part of the future, and we are innovative, and we are technology driven, and getting that message out and telling our story better so that we can entice these young ladies, and young men for that matter. I mean, the demographics of our industry is also awful. Like, we need young men and women, not just young women. And we have to do a better job of explaining the opportunity that exists. So I think Erin's spot on that one.
Yes. And a place where sometimes young people in particular, but all of us struggle, is how to be if you're in an industry where predominantly people don't look like you. And Erin, you've mentioned that women in male-dominated sectors sometimes feel that they need to blend in with their male colleagues. So could you expand on that and share what you've learned in that regard?
Absolutely. I do think, especially young women entering the workforce, that tendency and that insecurity to kind of hide in the back corner and not take a seat at the table. I know I myself, at a very early age, was told that I needed to get a thicker skin if I wanted to make it in this industry. And I actually took that as a personal challenge. It was almost a burn inside my soul that said, absolutely not. I'm not going to change myself. Instead, I'm going to be the leadership that I think we want to see in these changing environments. That's humble, authentic, feminine leadership, empathetic leadership style. That's one. And two, we're not going to continue to have women pushing each other down. We're going to have women bringing each other up so that we all can have a seat at the table. And it kind of, again, somebody said, if you can see it, you can be it. I have really tried to encourage, young females to go for those, that first rung supervisory position. And they say, well, I don't see any other female supervisors. And I'm like, you can run circles around this process. You're qualified. So, so go for it. And so it's kind of creating that extra nudge, the mentorship. Like, young women in these industries need mentors. I sought out mentorship very early in my career. In most of my career, it's been a male mentor, but somebody who's genuinely valued my style, my authenticity, and allowed me to be myself, but help encourage me to navigate this road. And again, the pushing up, bringing others up, and that paying it forward, I think, is really critical in these fields.
Okay, thanks. I want to bring in a couple of audience questions. We've got quite a few. An interesting look at sort of the, mid-career and beyond. Someone has asked, have you noticed discrimination against older women who are perhaps 50 plus? And this is something that I've seen people talking about on social media, including on LinkedIn. Is that something that you've observed? And, in that case, what are some of the steps that a woman who's mid-career or perhaps a little bit further beyond, who feels like they're not being offered opportunities, what are some of the things that they can do? So mentorship is something that I think is, sort of age agnostic, but would love to hear from all of you on that.
I think finding male allies is really, really important. Somebody that values that female diversity of thought and that diversity of experience, and is there to sponsor and mentor and share that perspective. I think male allies, especially in a male-dominated industry, are really, really important, and we need them to help be the agents of change. Because a single woman in an industry can't do it on her own. We need the entire leadership team to really believe that the diversity of the team is going to create that innovation through collaboration that is really going to drive, improving the bottom line. And those male allies are really, I think, absolutely critical for us to move the needle.
I would just offer up, I think it's to that question, and I couldn't agree more. I think also it's important not only to have those allies, which you need, but also I think it's important to stay current with the trends that are happening in your industry, the trends that are out there. And so, for example, if you look at, the explosion of social media, and most companies 10 years ago didn't have a presence on social media. Now it's so strong. So what I encourage a lot of people that I mentor, both men and women, is just make sure you stay current on trends, so whether it be all the stuff that's happening on social media. We're talking about AI and BI and data lakes, and just there's so many new trends that are happening in the industry. So to stay current on those, I always say knowledge is power. And we always need to be in a state of continuous improvement, no matter what stage or what age we are in our career. So always to try and stay current on trends within your industry, outside of your industry, stay up to speed. But I always try and read or learn something new every single day so I can stay up to speed. So teach yourself to be better than you were yesterday.
Okay, here's a similar question. What is your advice to women in their 40s who might be open to a career change, so moving into one of the sectors that you represent? And I would say that question could apply to anybody who started their career in one place and is interested in making a move. How do you get seen as a viable candidate in a different career if you've built your career to date somewhere else?
In my experience, women are very reluctant to put their hand up to try something unique. And the statistics show that women will wait until they feel that they meet 100% of the qualifications for any position, where a man will go for an opportunity in a new sector or in a new division if they meet 50% of the qualifications. So it's really important that we are encouraging those stretch assignments, encouraging our female talent to put their hand up for those unique, visible opportunities and those unique projects. Backing them, mentoring, so that they feel that confidence and they feel that that cushion that they can lean on if they're feeling the struggles, and that will allow women to step out of their comfort zone, out of their current role into a new challenge, knowing that they have the support of their allies and their ambassadors to make sure that they're successful. And then that breadth of experience will lead to greater succession opportunities in the long run.
Sandra, if I may, I'd like to provide some insight. Those were some great points that Erin made. One of the things that I found, because we've worked with not only young women, but women that were considering second careers, there is still a lot of stigma and perceived notions in the workplaces of what women can and can't do. And I think that similar to what Lisa said, in addressing those unconscious biases and checking in with those environments. I'll give you an example. When we first launched a pre-apprenticeship training program 8 years ago, and we spoke to industry about the representation of women on that shop floor, many said they didn't have any, and they also assumed that they didn't have any women working for them is because women just simply didn't want these jobs. Fast forward a couple of years, we then trained women, provided them a pre-apprenticeship training program where they had access to transportation, childcare, all the barriers that women traditionally face. And we brought 28 women into the workforce. And when we went to industry, the conversation changed. It went from, well, women don't want these positions to, oh, you know what? I do not have the female facilities for these women on the shop floor. I don't have policies and procedures to enrich, diversity, equity, and inclusion. How will my senior staff, who are all predominantly male, deal with having one woman on the shop floor? So I think it's really important as our organization focuses on building that pipeline. Because I can tell you, once a young woman sees the power of her potential, that power can never be undone. So we know from years of experience doing this that young women actually want to work with their hands. They want to get dirty. They want to work outside. They want to access all these different pathways. The question now is, what are companies doing? And I love that large companies are taking these steps, but we have to also look at small to medium-sized companies that may not have access or resources to spend on that money. What are we doing to support them so they can attract more women into their industries? And my last point is this, because it's 2022 and it frustrates me. I had a woman actually, she went to post-secondary institute, she went to university, graduated, and then decided, you know what, I don't like this. I want to be a carpenter. So she applied to be a carpenter apprentice at a company. Instead, they hired her as an office secretarial position. And for 9 months, she begged them. She said, please sign me up as an apprentice. I really want to work with my hands. She would go into the wood shop and work with the guys, and they refused, to the point that they said, perhaps in 6 years. So she comes to our workshop and she shares her story. And I said to her, and instead of thinking that the industry is the issue, she thought she was the issue. She was considering going back into another program at the university because she's not fit for this job. And so I think these are the stories that we really need to highlight. They're happening in 2022. Even young women, when they're in high school and they're going into co-op positions, some employers are saying, not all, but some are saying, I can't afford to train someone that eventually will have a family. Because if you think of the apprenticeship journey, it's 5 years that you're investing in that person. And so I really want to challenge everyone that's here to look at their unconscious bias, to be mindful. What language are you using when you hear that a woman, whether in her mid 40s, 50s, or high school, when she says to you, I want to be an auto mechanic, I want to be a welder, I want to go into the automotive industry. Are you supporting that dream for her? Are you wrapping around and saying, let's do this? And I think we have a lot more to do to create those welcoming and enriching environments, both in education and in the workforce, along with as individuals.
Yeah, some really interesting points, Noor. And I want to take it back to Ira, actually. In mining, do you feel that young women starting out or those looking for a career transition are really aware of the opportunities in your industry? And where would you say the greatest opportunities for them are?
Well, are they aware? No, we need to do a better job. I mean, I consider that, a top mission for me as I go into kind of the next phase in my career, because, we have to do better in attracting the best talent and building those skills. And so that's something we need to do better at. But I think we have come a long way at the same time. And for me, the world looks quite different than when I started my career. It's still not where it needs to be, but it is different. And again, I think companies certainly value diversity now. It's really, how do they get there? And how do we, again, it's about putting programs in place, but I think it's that cultural tone from the top. And just making sure that you are thinking about what your organization looks like today and where you want it to go. So I think we can't get too fixated on the short term. As much as it frustrates us, we really have to think about the long term and getting on the path, because you can sit and complain and we can all argue we're not as far along as we want to be, but what are we really going to do about it collectively? And do we have a realistic time frame to kind of start making these changes and encouraging young women to think about these careers? And then when you are lucky enough to land one, how do you continue to work with them to develop their careers and make sure that you're meeting their expectations, and at the same time, lifting up your organization to the next stage as well.
Okay, Erin, what are your thoughts on that? Anything to add?
I think we need to do a better job of marketing, to Noor's point around marketing to co-op students, marketing to the young talent that's considering entering these fields or have graduated and are entering. The automotive industry, for example, has converted from the post, industrial revolution, steam engine to software and high tech. These are, connected technologies. We've got autonomous conveyance solutions within the manufacturing plants. We've got the Internet of Everything and Industry 4.0, where machines are interacting with each other. We're using state-of-the-art manufacturing technologies with lasers and collaborative robots working collectively with people. So if we need to market to show that this isn't the kind of dirty, dingy type of work that it was so many years ago, and that the language isn't the way it was so many years ago. These are clean and bright, state-of-the-art facilities that, and we want to showcase these elements so that we can attract the best, talent in the world. And the best talent in the world means 50% of that best talent is female talent. And if we're not attracting them and educating them on the type of industries that we're in, they're going to be misled. And we have to keep encouraging those stretch assignments, getting to that very first entry level leadership position so that we can really move the needle up the pyramid and really change the dynamic leading up to the C-suite. And that, that starts from the attraction, the retention, and then the promotional process.
Okay, thanks. Lisa, anything you want to add before we move on?
Yeah, I will just say I do believe it's kind of a 50-50. So one of the things we've talked about today is education and awareness from, companies like ours to get out there, do a better job of promoting the working environment, promoting the opportunities that exist for women in these traditional women industries. So I think that's a huge part of it. But the other part of it, I think Nora talked about as well, is that we also have to make sure that, we are encouraging women in our own network, our own families, et cetera, to not put up any kind of walls against what they want to pursue. If you want to go, work in automotive, if you want to go work in mining, don't take yourself out without trying. Don't think, oh my gosh, I would love to do something, just get out there and have a non-traditional female role. I want to do something really different. Don't take yourself out by thinking, oh gosh, I don't think I'll be successful. So I think it goes both ways, the education awareness of employers, attracting, promoting, but also the individuals, particularly the young females, to get them to believe in themselves and not take them out of the game on something that they're passionate about and to give it a shot. And to Nora's point about that environment where that woman went in there and wanted to be a carpenter, don't let that one particular environment of one company squash your dreams. Obviously, that one particular company was not the best environment. So go find another company where they will hire women to be carpenters and train you. But don't stay in an environment like that, because there is better opportunity, and don't let a situation like that crush your dreams.
Now, is this a place where mentors can be really helpful? You put yourself out there, like the woman who, wanted to become a carpenter and asked to join the apprenticeship program and then was sort of crushed. Let's talk about like role models, mentors, and how they can help you as you move along your career, not just at the entry point, but as you continue to grow your career.
I think finding a mentor is really important, because that's somebody who is willing to share with you their successes and their failures. because let's be honest, not everybody has had the easy journey in their career. Careers are 30, 40-year experiences. We might have one bad week, one bad day. So it's nice sometimes from your mentor to hear that, they had some curve within their journey, that their journey wasn't this beautiful straight linear line up, up the ladder. And, so I think having mentorship so that those young female talent can hear that the road ahead isn't, it isn't a one-day journey. We want to look for the long-term investment, because, a career is something that you should enjoy the long path, but you need to know that there could be bumps along the way, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you need to disqualify yourself from opportunities.
And those are some excellent points. One thing that I wanted to add to that, and because going off of Ira and Lisa, as well as Aaron, if you want to attract more women into the industry, use the current women in your workforce as that attracting tool. And it goes back to the role models. Have them share their stories, have them partner and go into schools to attract more women. We often hear from the students that we work with that they had no idea that a woman could do that job until they saw a woman do that job. And we know that what we see on TV, the movies, all the influencing things happening on social media, we're not there yet when it comes to portraying a variety of different roles and breaking that stigma. So it is on us as a community, as leaders, to say, okay, what else, how else do we get face time with these students that are looking to us to educate them, to empower them, and to enrich them. And so that's one aspect. But I often tell the young women that we support, even women that are in the apprenticeship journey or in these male-dominated industries, not only surrounding yourself with one mentor, surround yourself with your personal board of directors. Because one woman may say, her experience may have been completely different. And I'll share a personal story. 4 years ago, I had my first son, and my husband and I enrolled in our professional MBA, and I was pregnant. And some of my mentors encouraged me to put my MBA on hold. So I remember coming home one day and asking my husband how many people had asked him to take a step back in his professional development. And he said, "Why would anyone ask me that question?" And I said, in society, in our environments, we mean well, but we still have this expectation that women have certain roles to play. And until we challenge that, until we address it, until we start having very uncomfortable conversations, that in a certain way, as individuals, we are discouraging young women from even thinking that this is possible just by the small comments that we make. Why is it that I can't complete my MBA and still be a mom and still be a professional? Those are the questions we need to start asking and highlighting.
100% agree. And as an adjunct to that whole conversation, I'll give you an example from my organization. We recently had a young professional accountant in our organization who basically put herself out for the CFO job in our local entity in Botswana. And she's a high potential candidate. We've been following her career closely, and we were very eager for her to step into this position. We put her in as interim because she had, limited experience, but was excellent. And 1 month into her internship, she said, "Well, guess what? I'm pregnant. So I guess this is, now I'm hooped for, the next 6 months." And, 1 week later, we promoted her into the role of CFO. She went on maternity leave a month later, and she's now on maternity leave, having sit in the job as CFO for 1 month. And these are the kinds of things you have to do as leaders when you have a valued employee that is going to be important to your organization longer term. And she could, went off on maternity leave, so excited about that next chapter in her life, but also equally excited about coming back to an organization where she knows she's welcome and that she's going to be able to build her career. So we were really delighted to be able to do that.
And Ira, that really speaks to your culture and what we talked about. That speaks to the company and your culture, which is critical. And that's what companies need to. What a wonderful story to share. And more companies need to realize that. and put those programs in place. You know, I always say this: surround yourself with people, places, and things that inspire you every single day. And the company that we choose to work with has to be a part of that. And the people that are at those companies have to be a part of that. So, you know, and to the point, Sandra, about mentoring, I would not be here without mine today, guaranteed. And I still rely on them heavily to this day. And what I encourage young women is this: if you are just starting out your career and you want to go, whether it is in a non-traditional female role, or go out and find people doing what you're doing, build that network, but ask if you can have a 20-minute coffee or a 20-minute, try and find those people and just ask them, I'd like 30 minutes of your time. Can you share with me your career playbook? What are the 3 things that you did to get to where you are today? If you had to pick the top 3, and you go and try and do that with many people that you can find, and then you take all of those things that they share with you and you learn to build that into your authentic leadership style and career path. But never underestimate the power of surrounding yourself every single day, both personally and professionally, with people, places, and things that inspire you. I can't stress that point enough.
Lisa, that is a perfect segue to another audience question. And this participant says, I've been told to create a persona at work in order to be a female leader. This did not sit right with me, as it always feels that women need to adapt to fit their environments rather than men adapting to include women. Any advice on navigating this? So it sounds like, maybe the advice or the support that she's getting is not necessarily moving in the right direction. Erin, I saw you nodding. Do you want to jump in first?
It does sound like there's a culture concern at her company. She needs to have the confidence to be her authentic self. Could you imagine how exhausting it would be if you had to spend the 10 hours of your workday playing a role of somebody else, and then you'd go home at the end of the day absolutely exhausted, where you could finally take this, this costume off of portraying some other persona at work? I personally would find that, work is stressful enough, let alone the exhaustion of playing somebody else. You need to find an organization where you are appreciated for your authenticity and that feminine, empathetic leadership style is really what these modern industries are looking for. And that's what's going to retain the best talent, where people can feel they can be their true selves when they come to work. I mean, we spend so much of our life at our place of business. Even if we're working remotely, we're still spending a large portion of our work week with our colleagues and our peers. We need to know that they will value and appreciate what we bring to the table authentically. And if you can't find those type of allies or those type of leaders that are ambassadors and standing behind this message, then I do think that you're probably not in the right organization.
And just to add on to that, I think that's the importance of having diversity at the table, is highlighting that that's not the type of culture we want to create. We want to support different types of leaders, the innovation that brings, the diversity in thought that brings, and how women lead or do their job is different, and that's okay. These industries, when we're talking about the male-dominated industries, they were designed by men for men, and that's a fact. We're not going to change that. But what we could do is take this as an opportunity to leverage everything we've learned and all the setbacks, and then create some tactics to really support not only attracting more women into the industry, but keeping them, and telling them to change and act a different way is essentially telling them that they don't belong, that who they truly are do not belong in the industry. So creating this inclusion culture is so crucial. I think of simple things like safety gear, female facilities. We talk to companies that may not necessarily have that access for their workers. And what we then hear from the tradeswomen is, that's a setback for us. That makes us feel that we don't belong. We're wearing safety gear that's baggy and that's unsafe. And yet we still have to go into work every day. So when I hear a lot of companies saying, how do I track the next talent pool? How do I get more young women to consider the career positions? We know that young women, when they're considering a career, they want a career that helps people. So what we do at Build a Dream is we highlight how engineers, truck drivers, logistics, manufacturing actually helps people. When you wake up in the morning, everything you touch, everything you use has been made or designed by a tradesperson or someone in science, technology, engineering, and math. And we highlight to young women that they could play a role in building hospitals, designing infrastructure, building homes, saving lives, if they just looked at it from a different lens. So we change the attraction tool in the marketing strategy to really align with what women want. What do women want in their careers? So if they want flexibility, if they want professional development opportunities, I highly encourage companies to share that in their posting, to highlight that in their posting. And I know a couple of years ago, we've had so much trouble finding stock images of women in these sectors. Like we couldn't for the life of us find women, diverse women especially, doing these jobs. So instead of waiting for someone to create them, we created our own stock images and now provide it for free for any company that wants to show their diversity on their website. You can access our free stock images guide that highlights women in the industry doing these jobs and sharing their stories. So I think there's a lot of work that could be done, steps that we could take that may just take one action from leaders.
All right, thanks for that. We've got just 5 minutes left, so I want to move on to another audience question, and this is for all of you who wish to jump in. How do you influence and recruit allies among the men in your organizations?
I'll chime in on that one. So again, and I think Erin talked about this. So it's important, to have mentors, but women and men, and so with my career, yes, I had women mentors, but I also had men, and I tell men as well, you need to have women and men mentors. It's just the diversity of your network is very helpful because you're getting different perspectives. So one of the things I do is I said, make sure that you've got men and women mentors. And also too, when you're setting up just like can I just steal 30 minutes of your time, love to get your career playbook? Do those with women and men to ask for their thoughts, reach out to them, build relationships with them. And that is absolutely critical to have that network of men and women, but you have to take the first move. I always tell women and men, you need to drive your career. You need to let your intentions be known. So you have to make sure that you're telling both men and women in your circle at your work, these are my career intentions. This is where I want to go. How can I get there? And also to go to the men and just say, I'm letting my career intentions be known. So I'd love to figure out how you could help me there. I would appreciate your words of wisdom, your thoughts, and your advice. But you have to drive your career. Don't wait for someone else to tap you on the shoulder and drive it for you.
I was going to say, we for the male allies that I've worked with, a lot of it is the education around inclusionary mindset, teaching them, the importance of inclusion, building those, diversity and inclusion and representation initiatives, into the boardroom discussions, into the business plans, into real action items for the company so that it's part of their deliverable as well, and show them that it does influence the bottom line. Women make up 80% of the buying power in many industries, certainly in the automotive industry. So if we don't have women at the table, we could potentially be misrepresenting our customer base, and that could really, really hurt the bottom line. And the C-suite is that's their focus, of course. So connecting that that inclusivity piece with the innovation piece, with the business competitiveness piece, I think really, really makes an impact in from their vantage point.
And if I may add, one of the things that I learned very early on was that we needed to get more men supporting this movement and getting more women into the industry. So having them as allies, but also champions when they're speaking to other industry leaders, leading by example and saying, we need to do better as a sector and we need to support more women in accessing these pathways. And I could say firsthand, the greatest mentors and allies that I've had have been men that, despite my pregnancy, have continuously supported me, asked me to bring my child with me to meetings, did not judge me based on the fact that they thought I was taking a step back. Instead, they told me to lean in and how could they support me down that journey. So I think that we are seeing that movement with more men, especially those that have daughters. Like, they say, how can I not want to make this world a better place for my daughter? And if you go and ask them for help, they'll raise their hand and say, yes, I'm more than happy to guide you and support you and bring you part of my and make you part of my network.
Being ambassadors for change.
Exactly.
All right, well, we've got just about 1 minute left. I'm going to leave it open for final thoughts. Anything we haven't covered that you think is really important to leave our audience with today?
I just wanted to say thank you to this panel. I think it's a really, really important discussion. I think on a day like today, it's very, very timely. I think we're in an important transition globally in society with, the technology wave. We're transitioning from decades where nothing happened to weeks where decades happen. I heard that in a conference last week, and I think that's a really powerful statement. And so this is the time when we need to embrace the power of the female potential talent that is available to all of us.
All right. Well, I would like to thank all of you. Sorry, we're out of time. I could talk all day. Thank you so much, Noor, Lisa, Erin, and Ira for joining us today, and Lorena for kicking it off earlier. And of course, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience who attended today, as well as FedEx for your support of today's event. Just as a reminder, for signing up, you'll receive a link to watch the recorded webcast in about 2 weeks. So give it 2 weeks, and really want to thank you again and enjoy the rest of this International Women's Day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandra.